From serving locally to serving others around the world, one person's story of living missionally is coming up next on this episode of Here at Home. Welcome to the Here at Home podcast, a podcast about the people here at McGregor, their stories, their ministry, and their love for Jesus. My name is Mark Bricker, and I'm your host for the Here at Home podcast. And joining me on today's podcast is Mr. Gary Goforth. Welcome, Gary. So glad to have you.
Great to be here today, Mark.
Yeah, is this the first time you've ever been on a podcast?
I believe it is.
All right. I like making history with people, so great. This will be hopefully a fond memory that you will cherish dearly for the rest of your life. Maybe I'm overstating that a little bit, but hopefully it'll be a good time. I know it will be. We'll enjoy having a conversation. Now, I've known you for quite a while and know a little bit about your background, but I'm sure there's folks that are listening that go, Gary Goforth, who is this guy? Tell us a little bit about you. Let's start with your family. Tell us a little bit about your family.
Well, Mark, Kathy, my wife, and I have been here in Fort Myers and at McGregor since 2012. We've got 3 children. Our oldest, Jonathan, is married to Amy, has 2 children. They live over in Cocoa, Florida, on the East Coast. Yep. And so when we moved to Florida, they were already in Florida, and so we knew we'd be getting closer to them. And our 2 grandchildren there, Charlie and Emma. And
shout out to the grandkids, yeah. All right.
Our middle son, Michael, lives in Clinton, South Carolina. He's in the Army there and married as well. And he's got 2 wonderful children as well.
More grandkids, yeah.
So, yeah, we've got 4 grandchildren all together. So very, very fortunate to have Christina and Paul there, and they get to visit Florida a good bit. But Michael's in the Army, and he'll be retiring from that in about 3 years.
Oh,
so
wow.
He's done well. And then our daughter, Sarah, lives up in North Carolina. She teaches chemistry at Campbell University.
Oh, okay.
So she's not married yet, doesn't have children, but we are blessed to have 3 wonderful children. And Kathy and I have enjoyed living here in Fort Myers for the last 10 years now.
Yeah, that's wonderful. 10 years. Wow, it's gone by fast, hasn't it?
It has.
Yeah, and how long have you been married?
So, got married in 1977, so I think that's, we're almost 45 years.
On one of those, coming up on a 5-year increment here.
Yeah.
All right, congratulations. Next big one, 50.
Yes.
All right, so we're going to talk about your roles here at the church, but I think it would be important now to let folks know what got you down to Fort Myers 10 years ago. All right, so maybe share a little bit about how you ended up here in Fort Myers.
Right. Well, I'm a physician, and I've been involved for many years in medical education, and so I was hired to come down and start a family medicine residency program by Florida State College of Medicine and Lee Health here in Fort Myers.
So that was the first residency program here in this area, right?
It was, yeah, very first one. And so I had thought we would retire in South Carolina because I had been involved in a residency program there for about 18 years. And got the call that they really wanted me to come down and start this new program here. And so it was an exciting time for us.
So that's what got you here to Fort Myers.
Yeah.
Now, at that time, you didn't think you were going to necessarily stay 10 years, probably much less than more than like maybe even 5 years.
Well, I'd actually told Lee Health and Florida State that I wanted to stay about 5 or 6 years, get the program fully developed, and then go back to South Carolina.
Yeah.
And so we just fell in love with this area, though, and McGregor was a big part of that. We just loved the church and our life group, and we made a decision. We're not going back. We're going to stay here.
That's awesome. Now, you pretty quickly got involved at the church. I mean, y'all joined pretty quickly after you came to the area here and got involved. Share with our folks listening some of the things that you've been involved as in a leadership type role or serving role here at McGregor.
Right. Well, we've done a number of things. I've been a deacon now for, I think I'm on my 2nd term now, so about 5 years as a deacon. Very much enjoyed that. Had the opportunity to serve as a chairman for this past year, but we really enjoyed that ministry. It was just it was great for me. And we've been involved in the Fishers of Men Life Group, and I've served as a co-teacher there. We've got 4 of us that teach that class regularly, and it's just been a wonderful class. And of course, as a physician, I've been involved in the medical response team. So people often see me on the back row where the medical people sit.
It's very comforting to see you.
Yes.
Knowing, okay, if anything happens, we've got Dr. Gary here. He'll take care of us.
We've treated a lot of people here and called EMS several times.
I'm sure.
So that's been a fun role for me. And I've been involved, Wade Harmon and I've been involved in the visitation ministry.
That's right.
And I've gone out on Wednesday nights and visited many people that have been to the church in the past. And of course, I went with you several years ago to Guatemala on a medical mission trip.
Yeah.
And so that was a great role as well. And so I've probably done some other things, but that's the ones that come.
Those are the highlights,
yes.
Yeah. Now, Kathy also has been very involved, your wife. Share a couple of things that she has a passion for and that she serves in here.
Right. Well, Kathy, actually, one of the reasons we found McGregor, she was looking at websites, and she's loved church drama for years. And so she saw when we came here that you were involved in the pageant. And that's really the reason we visited here first, because she thought that would be fun to be a part of. And so for the last several years, she's been involved in the Easter and Christmas productions, and she's on the tech team now and puts the slides up on the screen.
They got her involved in VBS this year with some drama too,
right?
Didn't they? Yes.
She loves drama, and so any chance she gets to do that,
she's going to jump at it. That's awesome.
Right.
She's wonderful. I really appreciate your wife very much.
Thank you.
Now, at the time of this recording, you are in the process of being recommended by the elders to our church congregation as a potential new elder to serve here at McGregor. Now, I thought this would be a good time to ask you this question. Share with me your own calling, your own desire to serve as an elder here at McGregor.
Mark, it's been several months now since I was initially approached about considering serving as an elder, and so I have done a lot of prayer. I think this really started back in the fall, and praying about if God would have me serve in that role. We've come to love this church very much. It's a part of our lives now. It's the reason we stayed in Fort Myers primarily.
Right.
I've enjoyed service as a deacon, but I just feel like at this point in my life that God is calling me to do that. I see us as being more and more involved in the church and being involved in recognizing those that want to join this church and being a part of shepherding this flock. And so I have prayed about it for a number of months now and feel that God is calling me at this time to serve as an elder.
What would you say would be some of the things over your entire life history of serving in the church that have perhaps been preparing you for a role like this?
Well, I think I've been involved in the church for many years in many roles. I've served as a deacon really since I did my residency training in Tripler Medical Center in Hawaii. I first served there as a deacon at First Baptist Church, Pearl Harbor.
Oh, wow.
And many of the roles in many of the previous churches, the deacons served in a very similar role to what elders serve here. And so I've certainly seen that side of church administration.
Right.
And I've enjoyed that. I have come here just to really respect our elder body. The men that make that group up are just outstanding people. They make great decisions on behalf of the church, and I just feel honored to even be considered to serve with such a body. So.
Well, we are in the midst of asking our church family to be praying for you and for our church and this decision, because ultimately this is the elders recommend, but the congregation is the final vote on that, and they'll be voting shortly on that. But grateful for you to be going through this process with us.
Yes, thank you.
Let's talk a little bit now about something I know that you're very passionate about. And you mentioned going on a medical mission trip with one that I led back several years ago, but you have probably, I'll ask you specifically, but I know you've been on led dozens of medical mission trips all around the world. Obviously that's a passion of yours. What first got you excited about mission work?
Great question, Mark. Well, my dad was a Presbyterian pastor that had a great love for missions, and we often hosted missionaries at our home growing up, and so I'd heard about mission work all my life.
Yeah.
And as a teenager, I'd come to know Christ as my Savior when I was about 12 years old. But as a teenager, I felt a very strong calling into missions. At the time, I didn't know I was going into medicine, but I remembered that. And then, once I became a physician, I just felt a passion to serve in missions. Now, the big question in my mind was, did God want me to serve short-term or be a full-time medical missionary? And I'd actually pursued serving with the International Mission Board one time. And I had an opportunity in 1986. Kathy and I both went to Ogbomoso, Nigeria, to take the place of a missionary doctor that was going on furlough. So they needed people to cover for him. And so we went over. She worked in the seminary there, and I worked at the Baptist Medical Center, and spent about 6 weeks in Nigeria serving in that role. And the Army was just so good at the time, they let me take off for 6 weeks.
To go do that.
And a great friend of mine helped cover all my patients while I was gone, but it was a fantastic experience. But in the end, I said, God, I think you want me to stay here in the U.S. and do short-term medical missions work and be involved in medical education rather than being a full-time medical missionary. That's the way God was calling me at the time. And I was involved in teaching at the time, and I did that for most of my medical career. And, it had a big impact. And one of the things that I wanted to do in medical education is take residents and medical students with me. I thought it's got to be a great experience for them, not only clinically, but they get to see God at work overseas. And so I actually built that into curriculum for residency programs in the Army. And one of the reasons we went to South Carolina, I was getting a lot of deployments and things in the Army, and it made it difficult to plan medical mission trips. And I had an opportunity to go to Greenwood, South Carolina, where they had incorporated medical missions into the residency program. I went to a conference at Duke one weekend, and I met one of their faculty members, and I'd actually brought curriculum talking about how to develop curriculum for medical missions, and met a gentleman from Greenwood. And he said, "Where are you doing this?" And within a couple of years, I was actually there. Left the Army, went to Greenwood, and then the guy that was director of the program at the time had started a group called Volunteers in Medical Missions. He started that in 1986 when I was in Nigeria. And I actually went to Greenwood in 1994. And so I went there, started going on mission trips with him. Had a resident who had said, if you ever go to Russia, that's where I want to go. At the time, the Iron Curtain had just fallen. It was an opportunity to go there. And so they called me one day and said, "We're going to Russia. Would you like to go?" And so that was my first mission trip with them. And we went to Moscow. We were handing out Bibles on Red Square and doing clinics there. I look back on that with all that's going on in the world today and thought, what an amazing trip that was.
To be able to do that.
And
how many countries do you think you've been to with medical mission trips?
I think, 15 or so now.
Wow.
I've done mission trips on every continent except Antarctica now. It's just too cold.
Yeah. How many mission trips do you think you've actually been a part of?
Probably about 55, 60 trips now. I've kind of lost count.
Wow.
I've done a couple of years. Other than COVID,
right.
I've done at least 2 a year since '86.
Man,
so it's been a long time.
So while not called to full-time missions, still very full-time engaged as far as leading others, training others, equipping others. And as we all know, when someone goes on a mission trip, how that can change their life in such a profound way that they in turn will maybe continue to do those short-term trips. Maybe some, as I've seen come out of our mission trips, end up in some type of full-time ministry mission work. So I'm sure you have you seen stories like that where people that have been part of your trip and how it's impacted their lives?
I have. I've had a number that are now full-time medical missionaries overseas. We worked with some gentlemen in the Philippines several years ago, and they're now there full-time.
Wow.
And I've, all of my children have gone. I told them when they were young that when they were 12 to 14 years old, I would take them on a trip with me. And so, Michael particularly, he is in the Army now, does information technology type work, but he's going to retire in about 3 years, and he's looking at going with Missionary Aviation Fellowship because they need IT people there.
Yeah.
But Michael, I'll never forget, he went to Honduras with me on the very first trip I took there back in 1997. And a few years later, I went to Southern Sudan. And they had just finished their civil war. It wasn't the safest place in the world to go. And so I kind of handpicked my team members. And Michael said he wanted to go. So he went on that trip to Southern Sudan many years ago now. And he's since been back with his wife to Honduras again.
Wow.
So Michael really has, it's been a major part of his life. And
what's the most dangerous thing you've seen on there? You mentioned Sudan. I don't know if that would have been the most dangerous. Have you seen anything where like you were even fearful for your life or concerned for the safety of the team?
Well, Mark, we spent a year in Afghanistan. We felt a very strong calling to go to Kabul, Afghanistan. There was actually a residency program there.
Wow.
And it was kind of an amazing story. I had worked with a group out in Oklahoma. There's a residency program there called In His Image, and they actually train Christian physicians to be medical missionaries in that program.
Really? Oh, wow.
And their program director, John Crouch, and I have become very good friends over the years, and I've been out there several times to do things with them. I'm a consultant now for their group for residency programs around the world. But John had called me and he said, would you host a gentleman who's wanting to go over work in Kabul? And he wanted me to bring them to our residency program. And he was really searching for residents to go to Kabul. And I said, sure, come on. Wow. And he did a presentation there one day at our noon conference, and I heard all that. And I told the residents, I said, this would be a great opportunity for one of you. You can really make a difference in the world. Well, you can imagine all of them said, we're not taking our young families to Kabul. And later on, a few months later, I went to a big medical missions conference at Southeast Christian Church in Louisville. And this guy, Dr. Tim Thayer, was there, and he gave essentially the same talk that he gave at our residency program. And when he gave it the second time, by the end of that talk, I just felt God calling me to serve there. And I spoke to some of our residents at that conference, told them what I felt God calling, and they said, we're behind you if that's what you want to do. And I came back to Greenwood and talked to my boss, who was the chief operating officer of the hospital. And he was somewhat of a homebody, and he said, you got to be out of your mind. You want to go to Afghanistan? And so, Mark, I said, yes, I really think that's what God's calling me to do.
Wow.
And it's obviously a very dangerous place to go. Every State Department website said, don't go there.
Don't go, red light. Yeah.
But we just, and we had some amazing things happen.
Now, did Kathy go with you?
She did. I felt like to make a difference over there, I needed to go for a year.
Mm-hmm. You don't want to be apart for a year, so
no.
You're going with me, Kathy.
So I knew Kathy needed to have something to do. This is a country that's not that pleasant to live in. And so I got a call one day. I told him, I said, Kathy is a high school math teacher, and you need to find an opportunity for her. And he called me one day and he said, you wouldn't believe it, but the high school math teacher at the International School of Kabul is going on maternity leave for the exact dates that you want to go to Afghanistan. And Kathy has a job.
Yeah, wow. Thank you, Lord.
So that was just an amazing thing. We had several things. I had a man call. Obviously, I was going to have to go as a volunteer and not have any pay. And I had a man call me one day, and he said, I've heard what you want to do. I'll take care of your mortgage for a year. And just amazing things.
The Lord just opened up the doors.
The Lord showed us that's where He wanted us, and it was a tough year. I mean, we went to a church there in Kabul, and every Sunday, you know how most churches say, please invite people to come. Well, this one got up and said, don't share the bulletin with anybody, don't talk about it.
Wow.
We had evacuation drills about every 3 weeks to teach us how to get out of the church and go to a safe place in case we were attacked by the Taliban there.
Were there many other Americans that are there with you?
Oh, yeah. They were all expatriates, a lot of Americans and other international people. And Christian churches were not allowed there, but they would allow this church as long as no Afghans attended it.
Okay.
So, but, every week we'd hear about somebody being kidnapped or killed, and we had a number of people lost their lives that year we were there, and it's humbling when you see that.
Okay, so when you go on a medical mission trip now to Central America and your living conditions aren't the cleanest or not the nicest, you're like, don't complain. This is nothing. I was in Kabul for a whole year. I don't want to hear you belly aching about the food.
Yeah, I have to kid people sometimes. They will ask me, they say, do you think it's safe to go here or there? I said, after Kabul, everything is safe.
Put it in perspective for you, didn't it? That's awesome. What would you say to somebody, because obviously there was a point in your life where you grew up, obviously your parents invested in creating an environment toward missions for you, so you grew up having that around you. But there's some that may be listening that going on a mission trip still sounds like a pretty strange thing, to give up a week of my vacation or whatever and to spend this money to go somewhere that's not ideal, maybe living conditions. How would you encourage them to really begin to pray and consider being a part of a mission experience outside of our own country?
Right. Well, I've had a number of people that have gone on a trip, and without question, people come back and say, this blessed me far more than I ever gave. I mean, they were able to go into countries and provide physical healing. We take medicines with us. We share the gospel. Make no bones about it to people that are going, that we're there to share Christ's love with people. And they are so gracious. Like I've been all over Africa and Europe and Eastern Europe and Asia, very, very poor areas of the world. And it's a feeling that you can't describe. How good you feel after doing these kind of trips.
Nobody's ever come back saying, "Oh man, I regretted doing that." You've never
had that happen.
Never had that happen. I ask you what the most dangerous thing, what's the most unusual experience you've ever had on a mission trip? Can you think of anything that kind of stands out as unusual?
Well, I have to tell you, I tell this story a lot about Honduras. I started going to Honduras even before I went to Greenwood. That was my first trip to the western part of Honduras. But and I think it was 96, 97, I was introduced to a young pastor there, Pastor Victor Gomez, that I still am working with today. And we planned a trip down there in 97 for the very first time. I think I had 16 on that team. And everything that could go wrong went wrong. We got to the airport in Charlotte. We were sitting on the airplane, and they came on and they said, we have to hold the flight. There's some people that are going to miss their cruise ship if we leave now. And so we're waiting an hour.
Okay.
And so I got up and said, well, we're going to miss our flight to Honduras if we wait an hour. And it didn't matter. So we ended up spending the night in Miami. We got down to Honduras the next day, and they'd given away our rental cars already. And we arrived at the site, and there was 2,000 people waiting.
Oh, my goodness.
They had been on the television broadcasting that this team was coming, and that was, I'll never forget that day. I think we saw 900 people the first day.
Wow.
Working as hard as we could work.
Yeah, oh my goodness.
And I thought after that trip, I don't know if I'm going to come back down here or not, but loved Pastor Victor, and he said, come back, we'll make it even better next year. And so I've been doing it every year since then, except for the pandemic.
There is something wonderful about having a partnership with a pastor and churches in a particular area where you're able to continue. And I know I've had the privilege of leading, probably close to, I think, 12 or so medical mission trips down to Guatemala, and we had a connection with a key pastor there and worked with their area churches.
Right.
And that partnership is wonderful to have. And going back to that, what you said about the experience that people have, I have so enjoyed watching folks that have gone, but I also have enjoyed being a part of that medical experience to see coming together, as you mentioned a moment ago, the physical healing, being able to minister to them physically, taking care of some of the most basic needs, right? You're not doing, typically anything major. It's usually very basic things, how grateful they are, but then the opportunity to talk to them about Christ and the openness that they have. And if you're working with a church, that also gives credibility to that church as well in the community. Any other benefits you've seen in serving it through the medical missions?
Well, medical missions really gives you a ticket to go almost anywhere. I'll never forget the work we did in the People's Republic of China and Vietnam.
Wow.
These are communist countries that if you said you're coming in to be
as a Christian missionary, they're going to say no.
No, thank you. But medicine opens the doors. And I've never had anybody say we couldn't come and do our work. And we always work with local pastors and people that speak the language well. And so we always open our clinics with sharing the gospel, and we have an evangelism station where we give them Bibles. In recent years, we've done we fit eyeglasses. So we have Bibles here that they can read from when they get the right pair of glasses.
Isn't that a cool sight to see somebody that hadn't been able to see or read in a long time, and now all of a sudden with a pair of glasses? Yeah, that is amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing about your medical mission experience. And you mentioned about the gospel. Let me just ask you this, because and you touched on it real quickly. Share a little bit about how you came to know Christ, because that was obviously the beginning point of a transformed life that wanted to live for Jesus, and it ended up being a lot through medical missions and just medical work in general.
Right. Well, I, of course, grew up in the church. I think I was probably in church the first Wednesday or Sunday after my mom came home from the hospital. So I obviously heard the gospel message many, many times. But when I was 12 years old, my dad took me to a Billy Graham movie called The Restless Ones. And that I don't remember the plot at all now, but I know at the end of that movie, I just felt such a need to have Christ. And I asked him to forgive me. I knew how much I'd sinned against him, and I asked him to forgive me of that and become part of my life. And I've really tried my best to be in his will since then. When I was in high school and I was praying, Lord, lead me into the profession that you would have me go, and I felt a very strong calling into medicine at that time.
Yeah.
And so he's really led me. When I met Kathy, we met when I was just starting medical school, and she came to Vanderbilt University for graduate school, and I had gone to Belmont Heights Baptist Church there. You'll notice I grew up Presbyterian, but I went to the Baptist. I tell people part of that was because I was a poor college student, and they offered food and transportation.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So we had a great experience there, and Kathy actually met me there during the first week of medical school, and then we married later on that summer. But
it's neat to see, though, from that point of salvation as a 12-year-old and your desire to be obedient, which obviously is an indicator that there was true transformation taking place in your life, because typically 12 and 13, 14, 15-year-olds aren't that concerned about obeying the Lord and seeking after him. And I'm sure you weren't perfect, but that desire to obey, but how God has shaped your life and led you, and you have been willing to follow him, and how he has used you, Gary, to think. I mean, I think of the number. I always think, well, yeah, I've been on a lot of mission trips. No, I haven't. Not anywhere close to how many that you have been a part of. And your passion, your eyes just kind of twinkle when you talk about being able to go to some of those places, and how God has used you, and what a blessing that is. And I hope it has been an encouragement to somebody listening that would have that desire to want to step out on faith. Perhaps it might be scary to them. It doesn't seem, it's going to whenever, we have several trips every year that we lead out of here. I'm leading one this year to London, and relatively safe. You're going to be in a city. We're not going to be, out in the middle of nowhere. But maybe for the first time, some folks would say, yeah, I'm willing to take that step of faith and be a part of a mission experience outside of my own country.
Right. Well, I know I would love to have people. I have people from throughout the United States. I was in Honduras in this past March, a month or so ago, and had a wonderful experience. And many of the people on that trip, it was their first trip.
Yeah.
And
that is neat to see folks on their first trip and the experience that they have. Yeah. Well, we could probably keep talking about missions all day, but I'm gonna wrap us up here. But thank you so much for being a part of the Here at Home podcast and joining us, Gary, and I appreciate it so much. But this wraps up another episode of Here at Home. Thank you, listeners, for being a part of our podcast community. And if you haven't subscribed yet to the podcast, please do so. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, you know who you are. You're looking at me right now. I would encourage you to subscribe to our channel and also hit the little thumbs up, I like, whatever that little icon is. That would help us greatly. And for all of you, please share the podcast, or if you're watching on video on YouTube, share that as well. But thanks for listening, and we'll see you back here in a couple weeks, right back here at home.